Good evening all, and welcome. Tonight, we are going to try and comprehend the boundless fear which people feel when at risk of being abducted. So get comfortable and let the darkness take control. Back when I was 17, something really scary happened. I used to think I was overreacting, but looking back on it now, it was actually pretty terrifying. In the span of 1 week, I had 3 different instances where I believed I was being targeted for abductions or something of the sort. It all started at the mall. My parents were out of town for a week, so I was hanging out with a friend. We were sitting outside of the mall, and I was smoking a cigarette, when this white car pulled up and rolled the windows down. They seemed kind of sketch to begin with. There were 3 or 4 of them. I can't remember, but they all had sunglasses on, and seemed to be in their early 30s or late 20s. They looked Latino. One of the guys asked me for a cigarette. I was always pretty generous with those, but I did hesitate a little when I walked up to the car. Something just seemed off about them. They began explaining they weren't from this part of town, and they wanted some locals to show them a good time. The guy that asked for a cigarette never even lit it, and then kind of make it seem like he didn't even smoke. They asked if we wanted to party with them. We politely declined their offer, but still won't forget how the one in the passenger seat said, "We won't take no for an answer." They drove away slowly after that. I asked my friend if she was weirded out by them, and she actually said she thought they were just being friendly. I kind of shrugged it off after that, not thinking much more about it. The next day, I was at home, pretty much just all day chilling. I was blasting loud music in the house since my parents would be gone on a trip all week. Later that evening, when I went to get the mail though, my neighbor walked over to me, which was weird since they rarely spoke to me. She asked if I was okay. I was kind of confused. Of course, I'm fine. Shouldn't I be? She went on to explain that earlier she came outside to walk her dog and saw a suspicious-looking man in my yard and an unfamiliar white car parked out front. She said the man was looking in the window of the house and also looked in my car. Once he noticed her looking at him though, he took off. She asked if he knocked, but I wouldn't have heard it because of the music. I was pretty scared after that. I called my parents to tell them everything, even about the mall incident. But they didn't really believe me, I guess. They thought I was being paranoid, and just told me to lock the doors and go to a neighbor's if I was scared. They said it could have just been my cousin, who stopped by, but I asked him, and he told me that he hadn't been by the house. Later that night, a pretty nasty storm hit, and the power went out. I was not about to stay in a dark-ass house alone, after all the weird stuff was going on. So I called a good friend and asked if I could stay with their family until my parents came home for the rest of the week. They believed me and were concerned too. They let me stay and even gave me pepper spray. I had one final encounter a few days after that. It was in a Walmart parking lot after just buying a few things. I was just sitting in my car responding to texts and finding music to listen to when a guy parks a white car next to mine and comes and taps on my window. I was pretty weirded out, so I only rolled down the window a small amount. He gave me a similar talk as the ones at the mall did, but a bit creepier. He said he wasn't from around town and needed directions to Starbucks. You could literally see Starbucks from the parking lot. So I just pointed to it. But for some reason, he asked me again. I started to roll down my window, but he tried making small talk. And since he was kind of creepy, I didn't want to be rude. He told me he liked to party, and asked if I liked to party. I'm not really religious, but him asking me this in the same way as the guys from the mall was just petrifying. So I replied, "Nope, no partying here. I just read my Bible." Then he went on to say how I was really beautiful. I tried to roll up the window and ended the convo there, but he put his fingers in the window, which scared me, so I stopped. He told me I looked like Shakira and asked if he could take a picture with me. Super sketch, right? I told him no, that I'd prefer not to. Then he asked if he could be in the picture with me, and I was like, "Dude, no, I gotta go." I was successful in rolling up the window this time. I bolted out the parking lot. However, I did notice after I left, the same kind of white car he was driving was following me. I was driving a pretty far distance too. I had to go to the mall to give my sister's husband a ride home from work. I like to take the back roads. And this white car followed me through all the back roads. And I got stopped at a railroad, and it was getting pretty dark. It was just me and the white car. I thought he was going to get out of the car to try and snatch me. I had my pepper spray and my phone ready to dial 911. I was in tears. I'm so glad the car left once I got to the mall. I have no real evidence that the car following me was him, but I still found it pretty strange a car followed me through every route I took. I haven't had any encounters since then, and I have no idea why all of this happened. I just know that it was absolutely terrifying. In 2007, I was 8 years old, and my family decided to go to Egypt for our yearly holiday, lasting 2 weeks. My family is small, only consisting of myself, my mother, and my father. My family were drawn to the beautiful history and the Red Sea surrounding Egypt, because both of my parents loved diving on their holidays. My appearance. I had golden blonde hair that went almost white in the sun, pale skin, big blue eyes, and I was a little chunky. The first day was pretty normal from my recollection, and my parents. We all went upstairs and took a nap. During the evening, we went to the hotel's restaurant located inside the complex. Here we met a boy my age and his single mother. They'd been here a week. I got on really well with the boy and spent most of my evening chatting to him and playing close by to where our parents were. When it came time to leave, I remember hearing my parents talking about how they were concerned for a lady and her son, but they wouldn't tell me at the time. About a week and a half passed, and I'd made more friends at this hotel. I was a very sociable child and would make friends with almost anyone of that age. I remember myself and a group of other kids wanting to go for a swim in the other, bigger pool. We asked our parents, and they all said yes, and a few adults joined us by this other pool on the opposite side of the hotel. My parents didn't come, as there were kid club people watching over us, as well as the other adults. My parents weren't there, as they'd both gone on a diving trip a couple of hours ago, and I'd asked them to go into the pool. They were fine with me being there, as there were trusted adults supervising. My parents were not in any way bad for this, as in that kids club they would take you all over the hotel and on the beach during the day, and this wasn't any different. I remember needing the toilet, and I wasn't going to pee in the pool. I got up out of the steps, and for some reason instinctively looked to my right and saw a greasy, ugly man just standing there smirking with a grin on his face. which I recognize to this day as being a leering expression, holding his phone up right at me. I looked at him and noticed he was in a security guard uniform standing by the gates to the other half of the hotel. The toilets were just inside those gates. I remember trying to walk past and him telling me to smile. Give me a smile. I ran back to the adults, but didn't tell them. Later that evening at dinner, my parents could tell I was being off and asked me to tell them what was wrong, believing I'd had a falling out with one of the other kids. When I told them about the security guard, my dad got straight up from the table, nearly knocking our food everywhere, and stormed straight to the manager's office, and I was left with my mum. About an hour later, he came back and said how the manager would pull the security guard into the office next morning, when his shift started, and they would go through his phone. I don't know how legal that is, but God, I'm thankful. The manager did just that. The security guard was taken in next morning, and there were so many pictures taken of me, from not just the day I caught him, but from the day I got there. Multiple pictures a day. From when I woke up to have a swim, to lunch, to when I was at dinner with my family, most of which I was soaking wet from the pool and in a bathing suit. Some of these images had been sent to men on his phone. The manager promptly fired him and tried his best to apologize by giving us a fruit basket. Yeah. And remember that woman and her son I heard my parents talking about? Well, she had been having similar issues, but instead of pictures, she had been getting calls on her hotel room phone from men saying how hot she was, and he knew which room she was in, and that he was going to sexually assault her. That's why my parents and I spent every day and evening with her and her son until they left for the airport. That man was arrested a couple of days after she reported it in the hotel, and he tried to attack her when he saw her. So any threat my parents thought was in that hotel was now gone. On this same holiday, my family went to a little knick-knack shop just outside the hotel for souvenirs. The shop owner tried to tickle me and put me on his lap, even after my mum told him to leave me alone and that we were leaving. He said, "Can I just have a kiss?" and touched his lips. I was hiding behind my mum at this point. She walked out with me, told my dad, who was outside having a cigarette, what happened, and let's just say we heard a few choice words from inside and the shop owner apologizing over and over. Creepy man, I hope you never get the chance to creep on another child again. I won't be going back. I was around 6 or 7 years old when this happened. I grew up in a small town where everyone knew everyone, as well as all of their business. It was historic and beautiful. Nothing bad ever seemed to happen, except for the rare death or murder. There were two that stand out in my memory, but that's a story for another day. My family lived on a main road running through town across the street from our local K-8 school, in a farmhouse with no farm and 4 acres. I loved it. However, this day is one that I'll never be able to shake from my memory. The area that I lived in is known for its very long, very snowy winters. Forecasts predict a heavy snowstorm to roll through in the late afternoon/evening. Due to the time of the forecast, most of the schools in the area decide to close for the day and day after. My mum, who hated the snow, demanded that my father call out of work to help with myself, my younger brother, and my older sister, but more so to help with the snow. We already had a good 1.5 feet on the ground, besides from previous storms, so my dad was happy to oblige to keep it from building up. Before the storm began, I made a quick trip to a popular chain bookstore with my mother. I can't remember why or what she needed there, but I do remember leaving the store with a new stuffed llama to add to my growing collection of stuffed animals. I was thrilled. Anyway, we went home with my mother's book and my animal, and were ready to call it a day. Shortly after our return, the first flakes began slowly falling out of the sky. My brother, who was only a year younger than me, began begging my parents to bundle him up so that we could go play outside in the storm. They agreed, but I had to go out with him, and we had to stay in the driveway where they could see us. I got all dressed in my snow gear and even found a doll sweater to put on my new llama. My brother took an extra 20 minutes to get dressed because my mother had to help him. Picture the brother in A Christmas Story, and that was him. Once bundled, we stomped outside in our boots and stiff jackets and began throwing ourselves into the snow. Time flew by. We had built a snowman, a fort, and had a snowball fight, and before long it was too cold and I wanted to go in. My brother did not. While I was trying to coax him inside with the promise of hot cocoa and a movie, a small maroon sedan pulled into our driveway. Weird, I thought. Who would be out driving in this? Then it occurred to me that it looked just like my Aunt Penny's car. I quickly ran inside to tell my parents that she was at the house, leaving my brother outside by himself. "Aunt Penny's here," I shouted. My dad quickly stormed past me to the window, and my mum followed. I wondered why they looked so concerned for a visit from a family member, so I ran back outside to the car to greet her. When I got outside, I noticed the car had pulled forward into our driveway, and next to where my mostly immobile brother, due to his snow gear, was standing. I waddled up to him and smiled, ready to greet our aunt, who lives almost an hour away. Instead, I was greeted by an older thin man with dark circles around his eyes and wispy grey hair. He kept his empty eyes on my brother. They looked hungry, like he was feasting on the kid with his eyes. My stomach sank, and I went straight into the stranger danger mode, pulling my brother back a foot with me. "Hey kids, are your parents home, or are you alone?" he asked. I stepped back another foot, and shyly answered that they were home, and that they were inside. My mother always told me to answer with this, whether she was home or not, in hopes of scaring away anyone with bad intentions. The man's entire demeanor changed. The hunger in his eyes vanished. He looked panicked and frustrated, and quickly began trying to back out of our weirdly shaped drive. But his tires were sliding on the fresh snow. Before I knew it, my dad was there. "Can I help you?" he asked. Then the man looked at him and started searching in his car. I stepped closer and inside. All I could see were lumpy trash bags and filth in the back seat. "Yeah, I'm looking for, Smith Road," the man answered. My dad pulled my brother and I closer to him. "You know what town you're in? There's no road by that name." The man fumbled over a few more words, uttering a sorry, and quickly left our driveway. My dad took down his number plate and called our local PD to let them know what happened. They said to just spend the day inside and thanked him for letting them know. I never played with that stuffed llama again. It went into my old toy storage bin and never came out until we moved years later, only to be sold at our yard sale. I always had a bad feeling about that day, and what could have happened if my dad didn't come outside, and I wanted to get rid of anything that reminded me of it. The fact that it shook my parents made me uneasy as well, as they didn't scare easily. I don't know who the man was, or why he wanted to know if our parents were home, but my gut feeling at the time, and today, over 10 years later was that he was looking for something more than the non-existent Smith Road. To preface, I am a 16-year-old male, and at the time this occurred, I lived in a small town in northeast Tennessee. At the time, I was living with my mother and sister, while my father was working overseas. This occurred a few years ago, when I was 13. My father, being a former police officer, always made sure we lived in the safest neighborhood with security cameras and alarms, especially since he couldn't be there with us. One night at around 9:30 p.m., my mother, sister and I were doing some spring cleaning throughout the house. My mother had me take out a box of magazines that she didn't want anymore. Even before this experience, I was always very paranoid while going out at night, and have always been very aware of my surroundings. Maybe because I'm constantly watching TV shows like Criminal Mind and Law and Order. So I pick up the box and walk outside. I do my routine of looking around the neighborhood, and when I didn't see anyone or anything, I walked to the trash cans at the end of the driveway and got ready to throw the box in the trash. When, lucky for me, the box broke and all the magazines fell out of the box. I groaned and began to pick up the magazines when I looked up and saw a man walking quickly towards me. My fight or flight mode kicked in, and I screamed and started running through my yard to my front door. I stupidly looked behind me, and to my horror, I could see the man running after me, and he was closing in fast. I felt his hand brush my shoulder, but he didn't have a good grip, so I was able to shake it off. By this time, I was getting ready to run up the stairs to my house. I ran up the stairs and tried to open the door, but my sister had stupidly locked it. I banged and screamed, and when the door opened, I fell inside. When I looked behind me, the man was running down the road in the opposite direction. After about 15 minutes of being hysterical, I was finally able to explain to my mother what happened. She immediately called 911. The cops came in 5 to 10 minutes and did a sweep around the house. We had a security camera at the top of our driveway, and we all went to see if it caught anything. To my horror, the camera picked up the man practically running across the street right towards me, and showed the man running after me after I noticed him. As I stated before, it was nighttime, so the only description I could give the officer was the person who chased me was tall, white male with camouflage clothes on. The officer told me he would do rounds around the neighborhood for the next 2 weeks. Unfortunately, I don't think they were able to find who did this, due to me not being able to give a lot of detail, and I never heard anything about it afterwards. I live in a town in Canada, with a population of 36,000. The town that I live in is known for the strange and extremely creepy people that roam the streets both day and night. When I was 10 years old on a summer night, around 8 p.m, so when the sun was going down, I was outside the front of my house by myself, riding on my skateboard. I was about to get going inside before it got too dark, when I noticed someone out of place. Across the street, I see an old beige minivan with very tinted windows. I noticed some sort of light or flash from the driver's window, almost as if someone was taking a picture. Before I know it, an old lady opens the door of the van and starts walking extremely fast towards me. It was happening so fast that I didn't even get a good look at her. As soon as she was walking fast towards me, I grabbed my skateboard and ran inside, locking the door. Once I was inside, I ran to my bedroom at the front of the house. To my dismay, the van was gone. I never told anyone about this encounter, because I always thought I was overreacting. I never knew the lady's intentions, but honestly, I don't want to. This story takes place about a week ago, on a dark night at around 6 p.m, with me and my brother, Ian. We were walking to Ian's place of work through a semi-secluded back road. We were walking, and out of the corner of my eye, I noticed a large, white, stereotypical creeper van, so didn't think much of it at first. As we were walking, the van followed us for the first mile of our 5-mile walk. I still wasn't thinking much of it until the guy pulled up. It was a guy who was well known around the town for being kind of a pedo. He, allegedly, invited some kids into his house on the first day he moved in. Luckily, their parents found out before he did anything. The guy kind of matched our pace, and I started to get kind of worried. I looked over at my brother, who was on my left, and he looked like he was also getting quite worried, as the wide side door of the car was right next to us. Suddenly he slowed down and rolled down the driver window, and asked us in a voice that sounded like it had been smoking Jamaica's finest for the last 20 years, "Hey, you want a ride?" We politely declined, hoping that would be the end. He asked once more this time, bit more aggressively though. "I'm just saying, hop in and I'll take you wherever, free of charge." There was no chance in hell that I was getting in this van. I declined again, and my brother and I started to walk faster, my brother catching up to me. The van sped up and matched us, and he said one last time, "Come on, just get in. You'll be fine." At this point, I was kind of scared and done with it. I told him no, and my brother told him to go away. We sped up once more, going into a small jog, and the van followed. This continued until we were in a full sprint, trying to get away from the large white van following us, and I was panicking. Ian and I, running a solid half-mile, ducked into some nearby shrubs, and the car stopped as the guy looked around. Fortunately, he didn't see us, and he sped away. My brother and I ran home and told our parents, who were equally as concerned. But that is where the story ends. I live in one of the most unsafe cities in the US, so I tend to never go to the city alone at night, or alone for that matter. I'm also a small 23-year-old girl, which makes me an easy target if I'm alone. I frequent raves with my boyfriend, and we've always felt safe. People may be drugged and or drunk, but they'll hug you, dance with you, and make you feel welcome. This particular night, this past October, we were seeing my favourite DJ of all time for the second time this year. Naturally, we stood as close to the front as we possibly could, second row. Throughout the duration of the show, I noticed a girl at the rail keep turning around and looking at me. The way she would look at me was really unsettling, like she was hungry, and I looked like Thanksgiving dinner to her. I didn't pay her much mind. I thought maybe she was just drunk or something, so I continued to enjoy the show, pretending that I did not notice her. Around maybe 1 a.m, it was the middle of my favourite DJ's set, and I was having the time of my life, dancing with my boyfriend and screaming the words to every song. The girl who kept looking at me turned around and leaned towards me, like she wanted to tell me something. Stupidly, I leaned forward as well, and she said, "I want you to be my friend." Confused, I told her, "We're all friends here, girl." And she scowled and said, "No, I want you to be my friend." I looked at her with a puzzled expression and didn't answer her, then turned back towards the stage to watch the show. A few minutes later, the girl turned back around to me and gave me the scariest smile I've ever seen on anyone's face, and she grabbed my arm and started pulling me out of the crowd towards the exit. I screamed and turned around to my boyfriend and started flailing my free arm at him. He was very confused as to what was happening, but being the good boyfriend he is, he grabbed me and pulled me out of the girl's grasp and pulled me into a hug. I turned my head away from his chest to look at the girl as she was standing in the same spot, unwavering, scowling. After what felt like 5 minutes of her standing and staring at me, she departed from the venue, staring at me the entire time she was there. Why did she do that? What were her intentions? Did she even have a ticket for the show? I don't know, but I don't want to meet her again. If you were around and can remember, roll your mind's eye back to the weeks immediately following September 11th, 2001. Everything was America, particularly in the South, and definitely in North Carolina, where I lived. There are a large number of military installations there, including a very large army base about an hour from my hometown. Nearly every car had, at minimum, an American flag bumper sticker, and a frightening majority of people thought anyone who had skin darker than a potato chip was a terrorist. Everyone was hypervigilant, and many people took this as an excuse to become overly interested in the lives of other neighbors, sometimes out of concern for their neighborhood's safety, other times out of concern for their own. I was 8 and was pretty sure my elementary school wasn't going to be the target of any massive terrorist attacks, and neither were my parents. So my brother and I continued to walk to school every day. This was never a problem. We walked to school every day. That didn't have totally awful weather for almost all of my school grade existence. My neighborhood even had weekly paved trails, including one that led directly to my elementary school, that we always took. I can't remember if it was recent rain flooding the creek besides the trail, or just the climate in general making the bugs come out in full force. But that week, my brother had decided to take a different route and walk along the road. This plan went off without a hitch, until we were walking home one day and a big black SUV with tinted windows and a giant American flag blocking the view of the back windshield and back seat slowed down to a crawl and then abruptly stopped in front of us and rolled down the window. A woman inside was blonde, maybe middle-aged, and wearing large sunglasses that obscured much of her face. "It's not safe for you kids to walk out here," she called for us. My brother responded with something to the effect of, "It's fine, we always walk home this way, and we don't live far." That was a mistake. She rolled up her window and drove a few feet away before screeching her tires to a halt and rapidly reversing back to us while rolling down her window. And she yelled, "You spit on my car? I know you did. You spit on my car, and you need to get in right now so that I can drive you home to your parents and you can apologize in front of them." I looked at my brother and we both shook our heads, and I called back, "I didn't spit at your car. Look at the side." And then she yelled again, "Get in my car right now so that I can take you home." I turned to my brother again, and without a word we took off running into the woods. My heart was thumping in my chest, and I never turned back. particularly after I heard the doors open and close. We just kept running. We switched back and forth through the streets and woods, taking several different paths, and finally ended up circling back around until we were home. We just sort of shrugged it off as, yeah, that was weird, until maybe 15 years later, when I told this story to a friend, and their eyes grew wide. She was trying to kidnap you. It has haunted me ever since. I remember this story that happened to me a long time ago, and it still scares me to this day. I was about 15 at the time. I'm a 22-year-old female now, and being young and dumb, I always snuck out at night to meet with friends. This time though, I was talking to a guy I didn't really know. I never met him in person, so I decided to meet with him at night at an elementary school, maybe 1.5 miles away from my house. I had no car or license at this time, so I walked. I ended up meeting with him for about an hour. I got pretty spooked and just ended up telling him that I was going to go back home because I was cold. He was very nice and offered to walk me back home, and I said no because he lived right next to the school and I figured I'd be fine. This is the creepy part. I took a different way home because I had been caught by the cops a handful of times and didn't want it to happen again. Let me paint a picture for you. I'm walking in a neighborhood on the sidewalk, houses on both sides of me, and cars parked everywhere. There was an RV parked almost 10 feet away from me at this point. All of a sudden, I hear this really loud music, and men being really loud behind me. I look back, and there's a little truck coming down the street, music loud as hell, with a driver, passenger, and about 3 men in the back of the truck. They looked like high school football players. They drive past catcalling me, and right when I'm getting to the RV, so they now can't see me because of it. I then hear screeching of tires, and I knew I was in trouble. My vision at this point is starting to fade a little, because I was so scared I was out of my mind. The truck comes to a stop, and all I can think of is crawling under the RV. That's what I do. I see many feet running to where I was just standing on the other side of it. One guy says, "Where did she go?" My heart is literally about to pop out my chest. I'm holding my breath because I feel like they can hear me. Another one says, "Everyone shut up for a second." Then it's silent for what seems like hours, but was probably only a few seconds. Then the first guy says, "Get in the truck. She's probably in the next neighborhood." Then they run back to the truck, making random weird noises, and peel out. At this point I waste no time. I get out from underneath and bolt as fast as I can back to my house, inside the window, close the door, and get to bed and start to cry. It's 4:30 a.m. now, and my dad will be up at 5, and I couldn't sleep at all. I never snuck out again. Thinking about it now, I'm not sure if they were drunk or in their right mind. I honestly don't even want to know what would have happened if they'd have caught me. I don't remember how old I was at the time. I want to say I was between 11 and 12. This was back in the late 80s, when children could leave their house for the entire day and parents would not be worried where their children went. Anyway, I remember I was in my front yard. I don't know why, but I was spraying some beetles that were on a plant that was pretty close to the road. All I know is that my mother had told me that that type of beetle was the kind that ate plants, and were quite pests since they would go after her garden plants. So I guess I wanted to exterminate them myself. Now, the road we lived on was a back road that wasn't very busy. Across the road from my house were many acres of state forest woods. Our house had 6 acres of woods behind it. We were about 3 miles from anything really. Had a few houses on the road, but I'm just rambling. So anyway, I was spraying these beetles and the car had gone by. I paid no attention to it at the time, but I've always been quite observant, and I mentally made a note of things. About 2 minutes later, I noticed the same car had driven by in the opposite direction. I noticed that there were 3 guys in the car. They may have been in their 30s. I noted that they looked Hispanic. Not that race matters, but I state this only to show that though they weren't creeping along, they were going quite slow. Slow enough for me to be able to see the car clearly. Each time they drove by, I noted that all 3 were staring at me. They had all driven by 2 more times, and I started to feel a little creeped out. So after they passed by the 4th time, I decided to just go inside my house. I believe I saw them drive by 1 more time shortly after I went into my house. I wasn't sure if they had plans on grabbing me or not. I didn't think that could be their intention, seeing how I've never been a pretty girl. I was always on the heavier side, and wasn't really much to look at least, not in my opinion. So yeah, that memory sometimes pops up in my head now and then. As an adult looking back, I feel like I dodged a bullet, nearly being snatched from my own front yard as a child. First off, I'd like to say that this is a true story, and happened in my area, in my county in Oro Valley, Tucson, Arizona. In 2012 I was 11, attending the 5th grade at a pretty well-known elementary school. I wake up and vividly remember my parents watching the news and discussing what was being broadcast in hushed voices. It's important to note that my parents never watched the news, so this must have been pretty serious. I was pretty curious and poked my head out of the hallway to see the TV, and the local news was reporting the kidnap of a local 6-year-old girl, Isabel Mercedes Celis. I stood in shock and disbelief. Oro Valley wasn't known for crime at all. Sure, maybe the occasional DUI, but that was really serious. Isabel was abducted in her bedroom at night. The only way her parents found out was when her dad went to wake her up. The whole city and state addressed this right away by searching, but not a whole lot came up. I remember hearing that a message was written on Isabel's closet that wasn't there before, but the police never disclosed what was written. So 5 years go by, and I'm in my sophomore year in high school. Me and my friends are all sitting on the table in the library before school started, and then I get a notification on my news app on my phone. What I saw gave me a mixture of disbelief, sadness, and anger. Isabel's remains were found. Whoever did this got away clean with abduction and now murder. I felt so terrible for her parents. It must be impossible to feel their pain. But what hurt me was that this girl was someone that went to the same school as me. It could have been anyone that was abducted. One thing that creeped me out the most, though, was the message written inside her closet. Was the abductor writing a final note for her parents as a sick message? Was he staying in the closet at night while she slept? Why won't the authority disclose the messages written in the closet? Is there more to this case? I have no clue. But my heart goes out to Isabel's family. There are 3 links to the case that can be found in the description. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed tonight's installment. If there's still more that you'd like to see tonight, don't forget that you can check out yesterday's awesome video about crazy exes on screen soon. Some pretty good stories, some very messed up exes. If you liked the video, please do not forget that dropping a like and leaving a comment goes a long way. If you're new, why not subscribe and press the bell icon to be up to date with new spooks every night. If there's a story that you would like to share and have read on the channel, feel free to post it to my official Reddit or send it to my email. But please be sure to include paragraphing, punctuation, and plenty of description, as this will maximize the chances of your story being read in future. But anyway, for now guys, I'm gonna sign off. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.